From Shaso Shasira, Commander Shadowsun. To our young, it is surprising that the other races of the galaxy do not always join us. The Shassel point to our great victories, peerless weaponry, and undefeatable strategies. Our future pilots praise our fleets that pierce the stars and spread knowledge, wisdom, and peace. The young poor speak in mesmerizing tones of the undeniable success experienced by all of our partners, from Kroot to Vespid, Greet to Nikasar. The apprentices of the Earthcast look upon our race's wondrous creations in every field of architecture, mathematics, science, logic, and engineering. How, they ask, could anyone deny us? We have learned at great cost that our enemies do not consider these facts. Their minds are clouded by false ideologies that have been failing them for longer than our race has even existed. Or they are driven only by base hungers and passions. They see not that the Tauva raises us above such pettiness, nor, sadly, do many care. Ethereal Aeon Lan, in his ineffable wisdom, recognized that no gift is more precious than that of knowing one's place in the universe, and that living and dying for enlightenment and reason are the greatest of purposes. All of this gives immense freedoms. We Tau all instinctively acknowledge the truth of his words. We all instinctively perceive that sometimes the parent must appear cruel to the child in order for them to learn what is right and be strengthened for the future. We all instinctively comprehend that the ignorant must be guided by the enlightened, and that progress cannot be halted for the benefit of the close-minded. There is a greater good. The greater good is higher than any of us or any other cause. It is what we live, strive, and die for. It is the galaxy's destiny, though it is with sadness that I admit not all accept it. It is our humble duty to make it reality for all, whether they know they need it or not. No deed in the Tauva's proliferation is an unworthy one. No sacrifice in its dissemination is in vain. We will topple false ideologies, make war into peace. Let sadness become joy, and turn ignorance to cognizance, for the greater good. The Tau Empire's fifth sphere expansion has begun in earnest. Reunited with the surviving heroes of the fourth sphere, the Tau work to fulfill their destiny and bring ever more worlds and peoples into the fold of the greater good. These populations made me ignorant of the greatness that could be theirs, but they will be taught. Beset on many sides by dead space or formidable alien empires, many years ago the Tau sought to circumnavigate these obstacles in their quest to unite the galaxy under the greater good. They envisaged this fourth sphere expansion as the greatest of its kind in their history. But it failed, apparently lost with all hands in a technological disaster. Only years later were survivors discovered, and Commander Shadowsun took leadership of the fifth sphere expansion to reunite the Tau Empire with its lost kin. Powering through the star-tied Nexus wormhole, Shadowsun's fleet emerged at the Nimyar Atoll, in a region known to the Imperium as the Chalnath Expanse. A period of intense colonization culminated in a ferocious battle against the Death Guard, but the Tau secured victory, and they are now prepared to strike out again. Humanity's beleaguered soldiery in the Chalnath Expanse stand against foe after foe, even with their skies scarred by the Great Rift. Holding on to their faith in the Emperor with all their might, they fight to quell rebellions and uprisings, as well as Xenos invasion. Even an armed force as insidious as the Gene-Stealer cults cannot count on their complex plans to unfold without difficulty. They are not alone in wanting dominion of the planet they call home. Other races and ideologies have designs upon it, not least the Tau and their greater good. The Gene-Stealer cults are tenacious and devious, and their claws are dug deep into the Chalnaf expanse. They will do what it takes to keep competitors away from their territory, spilling as much blood as possible to keep it for the Star Children. The Fifth Sphere Expansion. When a return recon probe proved that some of the Fourth Sphere Tau still lived, the Fifth Sphere Expansion was founded to reunite the survivors with the Empire. Beyond the Star-Tide Nexus, they met with strange findings and foul foes. Barely a quarter of the Fourth Sphere fleet had escaped the hellish sub-realm they had been pitched into by the mass failure of the ship's AL-32 slipstream modules. Countless colonists were slain by murderous and sadistic creatures dwelling there that defied all Tau understanding of the universe. Given the horror they had endured, most of the survivors could barely speak of how they escaped. It surprised many of the Fifth Sphere Tau that what discomforted their lost kin more than anything else was the presence of non-Tau species in the Fifth Sphere fleet. The Fourth Sphere's own auxiliaries could not be found, with only dark theories circulating as to why. Despite the many questions that still hung ominously in the air, Shadowsun wasted little time in progressing the Fifth Sphere expansion. The Nemya Atoll was wild and contested by myriad races. Piratical orc fleets terrorized the Fulner Nebula in the east, and scattered tyrannid tendrils roamed hungrily. Several Imperial worlds were swept up quickly by Shadowsun's forces, having been left vulnerable and isolated by the Devourer of Hope, known to humans as the Great Rift. The Fourth Sphere Tau relished war against these humans, carrying out acts of incredible barbarity, such as the slaughter at Salkio and the Fieliol Station bloodshed, and many others that haunted Shadowsun and the Ethereal High Council. Such were these atrocities that many commanders of the Fourth Sphere were subjected to the ritual punishment of Malklaha. Despite these hindrances, a multitude of colonies were established. Only months after the miraculous reunification of the Fourth Sphere survivors, the Nemya Atoll came under attack. Without warning, an immense armada of ships resembling hideously changed Imperial vessels broke into real space before the Star-Tide Nexus itself, disgorging torrents of ordnance and boarding torpedoes. The Nexus's defense platforms were buffeted by shot that corroded their crisp armored hulls in the blink of an eye. Boarded defenders found themselves under attack from enemies that resembled space marines, but with bodies grotesquely degenerated and beset by foul plagues. Many wielded huge scythes that could cut a crisis battlesuit in twain, or carried weapons that spewed gouts of toxic slime. Despite their hideous deformities, they were terrifyingly resilient, shrugging off withering weapons fire with impunity. For all the surprise of the attack, the Tau forces were highly disciplined, and the defence fleets responded with laudable speed. A great many of the invading ships were destroyed in salvos of heavy fire, but they were remarkably durable, like the hulking abominations that crewed them, and large numbers more survived. They disgorged thousands of warriors from their heaving bulks, who descended upon the stellar fortifications and ships with incredible ferocity, spreading their filth with joyous abandon. Broken reports spoke of the Tau themselves being infected by the invaders' disgusting contagions. None could explain how the Tau could be affected by Guelar diseases, and yet they were. Some orbital stations were so ravaged that their captains' last acts before succumbing to illness were to set their stations to self-destruct, lest what they suffered spread to others. When Shadowsun learned of the assault, she responded without hesitation, correlating data from battles on Kelek and Kalandhula. Shadowsun identified the attackers as the Death Guard. The Nexus could not fall to these monsters. The Death Guard could not be allowed to enter and attack the main Tau Empire. Upon arrival at the Nexus, Shadowsun's fleet broke down into small battle groups, each with dedicated targets and responsibilities. Some relieved beleaguered defence stations, while others engaged the Death Guard fleet head-on. Every action was part of detailed overlapping plans to present so many targets to the Death Guard that their fleet would fracture. Battle groups taunted and baited, retreating, then striking again. So this continued, but the casualties mounted at an enormous rate. Though the number of putrid Death Guard wrecks began to diminish, it was not enough to stop them. Scores of vessels still made to enter the Nexus. In a rare moment of doubt, Shadowsun considered that it might not be possible to win, and ordered for the Empire to be warned. In a blaze of light, an advanced prototype messenger drone sped from Shadowsun's command ship, past the Death Guard fleet, and into the Startide Nexus. As some of the Death Guard ships burrowed into the Nexus, those left behind suddenly withdrew from battle, their pestilential hulls absorbing terrific punishment as they made for a warp jump point. Vengeful Tau destroyed some, but a great many escaped, peeling away from the fields of fetid wrecks like a bandage drawn back from a still-seeping wound. On the other side of the Nexus, in the Zone of Silence, the Startide defense fleets waited with bated breath. Reinforcements had been pulled in from across the Empire, following the warning carried by the drone. But nothing happened. No foul plague ship emerged from the Nexus. For months the Tau operated at the highest level of readiness, but there was nothing. The waiting was almost worse than battle. Such was the tension. At any point, horrific forces could appear and submerge the Zone of Silence in a deluge of virulence. To what end the Death Guard's destructive attack had been launched, theories abounded. Tau strategists had no way of knowing whether this end had even been achieved, but all agreed the threat persisted. The Nexus's permanent defences were increased, and battlefield data was scrutinised for answers. The Chalnaf Expanse. The Chalnaf Expanse, home to the Nimyar Atoll, was riven by conflict. Tau fleets discovered Imperial worlds in the grip of civil war and mass civilian uprisings. Bringing the systems of this region into the greater good would require immense resolve and discipline. Shadowsun was confident that her warriors were capable. The humans of the Chalnaf Expanse had been beset by disaster after disaster. Firstly, the emergence of the Great Rift, accompanied by Tau overtures and invasions, and secondly, the Genestealer cult uprisings. Instances of mutation and seditious witchery increased, and governors and ruling councils bickered over which of these blights were causes and which were symptoms, as they fought to retain control. Not one system avoided conflict. Shadowsun herself attacked Astragoyus in the Thraxrael system, though the Sisyphus and Aragean systems were not directly assaulted by Tau forces. They were subject to Genestealer cult uprisings, so successful that more than half of their key worlds fell in a matter of months. Those few that remained loyal held on by a thread, their enduring faith in the Emperor, all that gave them strength. The defenders of Hyphus were embroiled in an intense guerrilla war with Xenos cultists, complicated by murderous Tau infiltrators and their duplicitous diplomats. The Ryatov system became an inferno of bloodshed between the Tau, Astra Militarum and Genestealer cultists. The inhabitants of Verotheon in the Barilil system counted themselves fortunate for some time before cursing their luck when the first forays of Tau encroachment triggered a mass uprising from long-forgotten parts of the Underhive in their capital. The Tau's core strategy remained the same as with any sphere of expansion. Disenfranchised human populations were wooed with tales of the wonders of the greater good. Insurrectionist cells were cultivated and ambitious leaders supported. Still, the Tau never expected to contend with the Genestealer cults. When battlefield data was accumulated and autopsies were carried out on the corpses of strangely mutated humans, the horrible truth was revealed. They discovered monstrous hybrids of human and Tyranid genetic strands. Debate raged amongst the Earth caste as to how this was possible. but all agreed that these creatures had to be destroyed with extreme prejudice. The Tau were quick to take advantage of the pandemonium of the wars already raging between Imperial forces and the gene-stealer cults, but it was not just the presence of human tyrannid hybrids that surprised them. Gewässer auxiliaries talked of miracles that often occurred around the Imperium's priest caste, defying any scientific understanding. The reports told of strange anomalies of human behavior. Sometimes outbursts of violent insanity often occurred amongst the Gewässer themselves. Meanwhile, strange portents were seen by the Chalnef Expanse's gene-stealer cults. Many expected the arrival of the Star Children, to be heralded by a great veil of shadow and silence, according to their scriptures and founding legends. When their leaders observed an increase in human psychic potential on their worlds, and a rising number of their own maguses being born, they were concerned. For many, these omens meant one thing: the Star Children deemed them unworthy, and they would have to fight all the harder for their deity's attention and blessings. With the Imperials clinging harder to their own oppressive faith, and the Tau invaders' false creed of the greater good capturing the minds of countless humans, many gene-stealer cults rose up in the name of the Star Children they so revered and worshipped. They would assert the strength of their deities, and in doing so, prove their own worthiness. Some even saw the increased number of maguses as a positive sign, a weapon given to them by the Star Children to destroy their enemies. Shouldn't it be magi? In the eyes of the Imperium, the Xenos threaten the very souls of the people. The great cathedrals of the Ministorum sent out their priests far and wide, believing that only unshakable faith could see mankind through this most severe of tests. The knowledge that the Emperor protects reassured all, from the lowliest factory menial to the greatest planetary lord. The Emperor had seen them safe for thousands of years through great trials and turbulent times, and he would see them safe through this too. Or so the gilded voxhorns in every hab block, manufactorum, and basilica blared. The raising of Astor Gaius. The imperial cardinal world of Astor Gaius was celebrated across the sector for its magnificent architecture, incredible wealth, and priceless relics. When the planet's unshakable devotion to the Emperor saw its leaders reject the Tau's overtures without hesitation, Commander Shadowsun herself led the resulting assault. The severed heads of the Tau delegation, who were sent to meet Astor Gaius's leadership, were presented to Shadowsun in 5 large gilded chests lined with plush red velvet, one for each caste. The humans had shown that they knew the difference between the castes, that they had listened to the Tau delegates and murderously rejected them all the same. The death of the ethereal, in particular, made Shadowsun's blood boil. She resolved that an example must be made of these Guela. Such an act would surely bring others into the fold of the Tauva more peaceably. Shadowsun took solace in the fact that countless more diplomatic efforts were being made all over Keshval, the Tau's name for Astor Gaius. Hundreds of watercast agents met in secret with middle-ranking laymen across the planet. They learned that the united front presented by Astor Gaius's governing body was in fact a thin veneer that concealed the world's highly fractious politics. Every family had aspirations, fears, rivals, and enemies, all exploitable by the Tau. In some places, the Tau formed agreements, promising positions of influence after the planet's fall, in exchange for alliance. In others, the Tau troops trained in clandestine warfare launched raids against specific targets, their goals to make their attacks resemble those of rival factions. Insurrectionists were encouraged and armed. Intelligence was gathered, constantly feeding data into Shadowsun's growing picture of the future battlescape. Some reports were more disturbing and unexpected. deep in crypts, tunnels, and other hidden areas, Tau reconnaissance elements found strange graffiti depicting worms and serpents. And some even recorded sightings of multi-limbed creatures scurrying away into the darkness. At this stage, none could say with certainty what these beings were, though the Tau were aware that weaknesses in human genetics sometimes led to ugly mutations and freak births. In keeping with her mastery of Kion, the art of the patient hunter, Shadowsun did not launch her assault on Astagaius for months. She knew that the more undermined and fractured the planet's leadership was, the swifter her campaign would be overall. By the time Tau dropships launched in their thousands, Astagaius was on the brink of civil war. Such were Shadowsun's preparations that not even alien conquest was threat enough to bring Astagaius' conflicting factions together. Nonetheless, those intending to resist readied themselves. All over Astagaius, the vast cathedral cities that made up the bulk of its inhabited areas revealed their capabilities. Gilded domes open like blossoming flowers to reveal banks of anti-air cannons. Panes of stained glass, windows hundreds of meters long, slid into their frames to unveil huge hangar bays filled with swift fighter craft. Processions of robe-clad monks took to the streets and barracks, whipping up crowds of people and ranks of soldiers into frenzies of hatred for the alien. The Tau made no direct assaults against these formidable defences, seeing such a strategy as a waste of lives and resources. Instead, their warriors were deployed to those urban districts deemed friendly following the watercast campaigns, or in the vast open spaces that were maintained as pleasure gardens, game parks, or simply left wild. Nevertheless, the Tau's contingents moved into battle swiftly, determined to bring the fighting for Kashval to a swift conclusion. Armoured interdiction cadres duelled against Astra Militarum armoured companies in the Sagittarian fields, hammerheads picking off Lehman Russ battle tanks with their devastating railguns. The urban sprawl of Belinok was stalked by roving tribes of Kroots working in tandem with breacher cadres. Their task to root out hunkered-down human infantry that had created a veritable fortress of razor wire, weapon pits and bunkers. Kroot carnivores used their keen hunting senses to discover well-concealed Gwalar soldiers, while breacher teams employed their advanced close-quarters training to destroy human positions with their pulse blasters. Battles played out across the world as the Tau kept up a constant stream of hit-and-run attacks. Shadowsun desired to demonstrate the Tau's military superiority by defeating as many of the fanatical enemies as possible, to force surrender without giving the Imperium anything like a solid victory of its own. But that surrender never came. Human resistance was dogged, their belief in their emperor especially strong. Shadowsun was particularly troubled by accounts of miracles, as the Gavessa and human prisoners described them. Some told of blinding light that obscured the charges of hundreds of human troops before they smashed into fire warrior lines. And others were barely credible, tales of priest types flying through the air with vicious chain blades to carve through battlesuits in mid-flight. Whatever the reports, none conformed to the physical laws as the Tau understood them. Yet drone-recorded battle footage showed such events occurring. So persuasive were some of these events that elements of the Gavessa turned on their Tau allies, screaming their repentance as they opened fire on those they had called comrades only minutes before. Frequent breakouts of insanity occurred in the Tau ranks, of the same kind the Tau had encountered after the Devourer of Hope emerged. As before, these were confined to humans and other non-Tau species, and were swiftly concealed by the Tau hierarchy. Any Tau discovered referring to strange aliens stepping out of the ruined corpses of insane humans were quarantined and dispatched to special hospitals for recovery. When a detachment of Fourth Sphere Tau was discovered by their Fifth Sphere allies, killing prisoners, including humans, who had already embraced the greater good. Its commander stated that one day the rest of the Empire would thank him before he took the Mount Clara. As the fighting raged on, all over Astagaius, Shadowsun looked keenly for a crucial weakness that she could capitalize on to bring the bloody war to an end. The humans' morale was strong, stronger than she had ever seen elsewhere. They held to their beliefs with a vigour that almost defied imagination. Their faith was their life. It was their greatest strength. Could that make it their greatest weakness? Gathered intelligence indicated that the humans fought hard over sites and artifacts of particular religious significance, and that if these fell or were captured, acts of individual surrender spiked. When human propaganda boasted that not a single cathedral city had fallen, Shadowsun knew her next move. She would topple the planet's greatest cathedral city, Iglisor Magna. The capture of such a place would surely cripple the resolve of the staunchest human defenders. They would know their emperor was not with them when the broadcasts filled with Tau declarations of victory and peace offerings to those humans that still resisted began in earnest. Shadowsun's forces made to surround Iglisor Magna. Potential human relief forces were subject to relentless assault as Riptide and Ghost-Keel battlesuits ambushed armoured columns, and innumerable swarms of drones were deployed to harass infantry forces. Tau contingents surrounding the cathedral city were under strict orders from Shadowsun to leave clear a passage outwards. She could not risk the defenders believing that they had no option but a fight to the death. Escape had to be seen as a real possibility for them, although Shadowsun's forces were secretly placed to kill or capture any that actually attempted to break out. The Tau intercepted and hacked all human communications and broadcast demands to surrender. Those that handed themselves over, they declared, would be offered food, water, and safety. Not one Gwelar capitulated. Advanced infiltration cadres made the first forays into Iglisor Magna, striking from all directions. They expected fierce resistance from the outset, their only mission to identify defensive emplacements and mark them out for destruction. However, they were actually able to advance several kilometres into the city, past abandoned defensive cannons and bunkers. They did not know why their Gwelar had yielded these positions, and Shadowsun cautiously ordered her follow-up contingents to begin securing them so that they could not be reoccupied by the humans. Hundreds of Fire Warrior teams tactically advanced from gilded column to gilded column through small chapels, accommodation for menials, and enormous basilicas large enough to house dozens of armoured vehicles. Shadowsun believed that the absence of defenders could only mean a trap, so the advanced cadres were ordered to take deliberate care. In spite of herself, Shadowsun looked forward to the humans' efforts to attack her well-trained warriors, and to seeing them fail. But she underestimated her opposition. Hundreds of unsuspecting fire warriors were killed when parts of ceiling frescoes were peeled away to reveal murder holes, through which the defenders dropped explosives and grenades. Trapdoors large enough to swallow storm surges opened beneath the advancing Tau forces. Those unfortunate enough to fall through were butchered by zealots or destroyed by the autocannons and las cannons of waiting heavy weapons teams. So began months of guerrilla war and counter-insurgency actions. Kyan and Monk-Car strategies were carried out at squad level. The humans knew every secret passage of their cathedral city, using them to their immense advantage, and in doing so, claiming countless Tau lives. The Tau drew the defenders into ambushes and kill zones of their own, utilizing the secret passages they discovered themselves, or deliberately threatening certain artifacts or shrines to draw out Iglisor Magna's road defenders. As casualties mounted, Shadowsun refused to overcommit her forces in an all-out assault. To do so would be to throw away lives, and as the noose of Tau forces tightened around the defenders, surrender seemed inevitable, but no surrender came. Shadowsun also had to withdraw her Gavessa forces, whose brutality towards the defenders had grown to a height she could not tolerate. Torture of prisoners and mutilation of the dead were common. Some Gavessa openly wore jewelry made from the extracted teeth of the dead. They frequently disobeyed orders to hold position, instead pursuing retreating foes, making themselves and others vulnerable in the process. Strange anomalies and insanity outbreaks became more frequent where humans fought other humans. Despite all this, the Tau were winning. More territory was secured with each passing day, as the defenders' numbers depleted and their supplies ran low. The desperation of Shadowsun's enemies was finally revealed when thousands of them launched an overwhelming attack to break out. They were nearly successful. Such was the surprise they achieved. Thundering companies of battle tanks and tens of thousands of zealous troops came perilously close to overrunning the city's western districts. It was only thanks to Tau discipline and the careful deployment of rapid response cadres full of crisis battlesuits and devilfish-mounted fire warrior teams that the attack was stymied. The failure of this assault broke the defenders' backs. Such were the resources required to launch it, and finally, pockets of emaciated and terrified humans began to surrender. The pace of the Tau's advance soon quickened, and the noose tightened completely. Shadowsun herself took to the field in the final battles of the conflict, as the last of Iglisor Magna's starving humans surrendered or were cut down. Her twin fusion blasters, incinerating countless defenders and melting through scores of bunkers. Shadowsun's victory at Iglisor Magna was projected all over Keshval. The glory of the Tauvar shone for all to see. The ethereals of the Fifth Sphere smiled, knowing that surely this spelled the end of human resistance on the planet. Watercast aides prepared victory speeches, but the move was premature. Seeing the mighty spires of Iglisor Magna topple to the ground and shatter into millions of pieces, it simply stiffened the resolve of those who still fought. With sadness, Shadowsun had little choice but to accept that much blood was still to be spilled, though humanity's suicidal drive to fight regardless of casualties made her shudder. After the battle's conclusion, Commander Shadowsun walked the wards of Hospital Ship 227. So many of these vessels had been constructed since the Damocles Crusade that Tau had ceased naming them. Shadowsun had come unannounced, dressed in simple robes. Bunk after bunk was filled with wounded and dying Tau. Many had lost limbs, while others were held down with tight restraints, driven mad by horror. Earth-cast orderlies rushed past bearing medicines and surgical equipment, so busy that they failed to notice that Shadowsun herself walked amongst them. Each hospital ship had capacity for around 5,000 wounded. Every one of the dozens in Astragalus' orbit were operating well beyond those limits. Shadowsun saw the dead jettisoned from airlocks in their hundreds. They would normally have been burned in honourable funeral ceremonies, but such were their numbers and the demand for space that there was simply no time to observe tradition. The commander knew that not one of the fallen would begrudge this necessity, nor if it mattered so long as it was done for the greater good. Battle still raged on Master Gaius, and Shadowsun would not let their sacrifice be in vain. The Haphos Containment. Haphos was in the grip of rebellion. The Great Rift had brought panic and fear, its ominous presence in the skies shattering the population's sense of safety. All contact with the wider Imperium was lost, though the planet's governor, Zula Hetia, had no reason to believe she would not continue to meet her tithe requirements. Densely populated Haphos was a mining world in the Pecan system. A key planet in the region, it had produced vast quantities of promethium and metals for use in munitions for thousands of years. Like many Imperial worlds, its population had suffered terribly since the Great Rift's emergence. In their fright, they had turned to firebrands and demagogues, whose powerful message of survival through change appeared to offer the security the Imperium could not. Governor Hatia's planetary defense regiments were faced with rapidly increasing outbreaks of mutation and a multitude of cults devoted to what they called the One-Eyed Liege. One such cult, the followers of the Red Monarch, were responsible for dozens of atrocities, most notoriously the Isubaya tunnel collapse, which claimed over 30,000 lives. Meanwhile, the Cyclopeans, a cult whose members were noted for ritually putting out one of their own eyes in honor of their deity, launched an attack on the Calixtos spaceport, delaying Promethium exports by several weeks. Freak events, described by eyewitnesses as heretical sorcery and witchcraft, became more common. The Lascari mine massacre, the Mulliga refinery inferno, and the insanity of Hab Block 27A were but a handful of instances in an ever-growing list of malign events. When the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica failed to arrive according to their schedule, Hyphus was left with thousands of dangerous psychers in its custody. This was seen as an opportunity by the increasingly desperate governor, however. Against advice from her councillors, Zula Hetia offered freedom to some of the psychers in exchange for their help in seeking out mutants and rogue psychers. Those that did not comply, willingly or otherwise, were culled. The initial success of this campaign surprised even Governor Hatia. With the psychers' aid, the followers of the Red Monarch were hunted down and destroyed by 4 regiments of Hyphosian phalanxery in the dense hub blocks of Zenora City's southwest district. The mutants of Titanium Shaft 67 were burned out by the Catachan 99 land sharks, and the 343rd Devil Hunters were temporarily stationed on the planet to provide jungle warfare training for the Hyphosian regiments. The undersea mines of the Anthemian Trench were the site of fierce fighting between the cult of Chalconides and more than 30 companies of the Hyphosian Tritons. Renowned combat aquanauts, the Tritons restored the mines to full function in a matter of weeks, leaving no heretic alive. Following the successes of her campaigns up to that point, when a violently migrating mutant colony of hundreds of thousands was identified in the vast tunnel complexes beneath the Latinion subcontinent, Hatia was convinced that victory was inevitable. Infantry from 20 Hyphosian phalanxery regiments were dispatched, alongside 7 regiments of Hyphosian Klebanari, replete with squadrons of thundering Leman Russ battle tanks, flame-belching hellhounds and striding sentinels. A dozen allied regiments from other worlds were also allocated to what was expected to be a glorious battle. The braying mutants encountered by the combined Imperial forces were swiftly crushed, ground beneath armoured tracks, or cut down by waves of accurate las and heavy bolter fire. Nests and homesteads were purged with gouts of burning Promethium, or virulent, fleshy, melting toxins. However, soon the mutants' great numbers began to tell, and they pushed back. The sound of battle filled the tunnels of every kind, from those so narrow that guardsmen could only walk them single file, to those wide enough for a company of Leman Russ tanks to drive through abreast. Vox lines were flooded with screams of guardsmen being shredded by savage creatures, or tank crews crying for aid, as their vehicles were swamped with a deluge of noxious vomit. The clashes reached their peak intensity in the junctions where various tunnels met, amongst abandoned way stations and checkpoints. It was here, too, that the nature of the war on Hyphus changed completely, and Governor Hatia learned just why the mutants fought with such unbridled savagery. They were fleeing something else, something worse than the Astra Militarum forces that came to destroy them. Others dwelled in Latinion's nightmarish underworld, and they too sought the destruction of the mutants so that they could claim the planet for themselves. These other cults had bided their time, growing their strength, with a patience and diligence unmatched by the mutants the Hyphosian forces had faced so far. The first Imperial troops to encounter this new threat identified weaponized mining vehicles and Achilles Ridge Runners advancing at speed, its humanoid crew unleashing torrents of ammunition from rapid-firing weapons as they ran down those too slow to escape them. This unexpected foe attacked the Imperial forces immediately, catching them totally by surprise. Expecting a swift victory against an ill-disciplined enemy, Hyphus's troops found themselves on the defensive against a highly organised and well-equipped force. Infantry platoons were encircled and outflanked by foes mounted on Atalan jackals before being pounced upon by clawed, multi-limbed horrors clad in well-worn mining gear. Sentinel squadrons were beset by heavily muscled monstrosities that ripped open cockpits and tore apart the pilots. Conflicting reports claimed that this new foe was made up of traitors, xenos, or new strains of mutant. Some Imperial officers were in a position to rally their troops in time and take some initiative. The Bastion Breakers, Lehman Russ Demolisher Company, charged headlong into an onslaught of Goliath rock grinders. Such bravery cost the lives of all the tank's crews, but stymied an assault that could have destroyed much of the 12th Reithoff Grenadiers' 5th and 6th Companies. The 81st Hyphosian Clibanares, 2nd Hellhound Company, raced at high speed to relieve the trapped Pucani Hearthguard, striking with such fury that not only were their allies rescued, but hundreds of the cultists were incinerated by burning promethium. Some of these cultists were even successfully captured, though those that achieved this incredible feat were executed for unlawful contact with foes of the Imperium after their captives were taken away. Within a matter of hours, the battle was over. The new enemy had slunk away and retreated despite their significant battlefield advantages. The mutant colony had indeed been destroyed, but thousands of Imperial troops were also slain, their broken bodies scattered over multiple battlefields. Hundreds of tank wrecks burned, the smog poisoning the thin subterranean air. Governor Hattia denied her swift and magnificent victory was shaken. Against all military advice, she withdrew her surviving troops rather than ordering a pursuit, hoping this new foe would never be encountered again. Her regiments had scared them off. They would surely not return. But return they did. Simultaneous uprisings broke out across Hyphus, each one with similar attributes: repurposed civilian vehicles loaded with weaponry, many-limbed monsters with claws and wicked blades, and humanoid warriors clad in battered mining attire and wielding crude weapons. There was another common thread, in that all focused particular attention on the planet's spaceports, in particular, Elitairo, Hyphus's largest. Hattia had little idea what kind of intelligence drove these creatures, but even a fool could see that their actions were no coincidence. They sought to escape. Hattia was determined that this would not happen, committing her generals to ensuring that the spaceports held. She could not risk the wider Imperium learning of what horrors her planet harboured, and had allowed to fester in its depths. Elitairo was the size of a city. Its bustling docks supported thousands of commercial and military spacecraft, and heaved with servitors, crews going about on shore business, and mysterious agents of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Vast landing pads sat amid storehouses packed with supplies ready to be dispatched off-world. Colossal fuel tanks kept the engines of Imperial trade running. Hab blocks for workers were everywhere, amongst workshops where machinery ceaselessly groaned, banged, and clanked. But the sounds of industry swiftly changed to sounds of battle. Alien chants and screeches met the battle oaths of Imperial priests and soldiery, and the air filled with the crack of lasguns, the roar of cannons, and the chug of repeating guns. The place of commerce and civility had become one of war, where once merchants had discussed at length the finer details of their trade agreements. Imperial soldiers now patrolled, seeking to draw out their elusive foe. Where once goods were piled high, gene-stealer cultists now hid, burrowed, and made their lairs. Vicious firefights broke out daily, and the smell of industry was replaced with the stench of rotting flesh. The insidious creatures laced many corridors with traps and used every known guerrilla tactic. Patrols were ambushed and destroyed. Guardsmen ripped to shreds by bestial claws, and armoured columns fell into well-disguised tank traps filled with anti-armour mines. Infantry platoons reported being assaulted from all sides at once, many of them caught in deadly autogun crossfire, even as purple-skinned monsters rushed to tear them limb from limb. Others came under assault for scant minutes before their attackers broke off completely and disappeared, leaving no trace. Officer after officer was assassinated, their bodies found bearing hideous blade wounds or pistol shots to the head. Mines and other explosive devices became as prolific as the blood-sucking flies in the Leont marshlands, and thousands upon thousands of soldiers lost limbs to them. Areas swept clear of explosives were often found riddled with them again, only days later, and without the oratory and zealotry of military priests and commissars, many of Hyphas's senior officers expected their soldiers' morale to collapse beyond recovery. The governor's forces had advantages of their own, however. With the wealth of the planet behind them, they were able to bring formidable numbers and firepower to bear. Hattia's generals sought to capitalize on this and draw the enemy into open battle, presenting them with weak forces acting as lures. When they attacked infantry companies placed deliberately as bait, whole gene cycles were wiped out by squadrons of roaring hellhounds and deadly Valkyrie gunships. The Hyphosian mobilized forces large enough to sweep whole swathes of Elitairo in gigantic pincer movements. Infantry regiments and implacable armoured companies closed on certain areas of the spaceport like a vice, leaving their enemies no escape. Though these battles resulted in enormous losses for Hattia's forces, as the cultists fought for their survival like frenzied, caged animals, the strategy's overall effectiveness was hard to deny. Once it had been fully implemented, it would only be a matter of time before Elitairo was secure. The fighting remained arduous nonetheless. Blade-limbed Xenos cultists inflicted appalling damage, tearing apart Imperial infantry with frightening ease before they were put down. Hulking beasts wielding immense picks and hammers shrugged off all but the heaviest weapons fire as they crushed their enemies to pulp. An entire Thraxxerilian guard regiment even fell to the Xenos taint, turning on their allies in a terrible surprise attack. It took months of grueling fighting to finally destroy them, in which time other units also had to be purged. The same corruption had somehow spread from the cultists to thousands of Imperial troops. Nevertheless, these were all but minor setbacks. The cultists had nowhere left to run. Elitairo was eventually judged secure, though sporadic fighting continued for months after the official declaration of victory. The port itself was now little more than a blasted ruin. Many of the ships it had docked, reduced to slag, or barely valuable for scrap. Even with no other port under attack, it was doubtful that Hyphas would be able to meet its tithe requirements for years. But Hattia was optimistic. If they had won here, they could win elsewhere. They had been out of contact with the wider Imperium for years, and the governor believed that, if this state of affairs continued, she would be able to rebuild and produce enough resources to meet any requirements once contact was re-established. Just as Hattia's first smile for many months appeared on her face, she received word. A Xenos fleet approached. It was the Tau. The Tau first came to Hyphas at the height of the fighting against the Genestealer cult uprisings. Making their diplomatic overtures to Governor Hattia directly, they explained that they were of the Water caste, one of 5 castes that made up their race. They identified Hyphas's new threat as the Genestealer cults, explaining in detail how the Tau had engaged them on other worlds, and how they wished to form a partnership with Imperial governors to defeat that most terrible threat. At this time, Hattia was desperate. Everything she had ever known appeared to be crashing down around her, and her armies were nearly bled dry by myriad forces. The stars of the night skies had changed beyond all recognition. The Imperium was out of reach. The Xenos' proposal was a tempting one. They spoke persuasively. offering the victory, peace, and prosperity Hattia desired so much. She questioned what the Imperium had ever done for her, what it was doing for her now. She was prepared to acquiesce to their offer when tidings were brought to her from an Imperial priest who had miraculously survived a terrific battle. The priest spoke of a Xenos foe that fought with advanced weaponry, whilst clad in enormous warsuits. They had killed Imperial soldiery and gene-stealer cultists with equal impunity. Upon hearing this, Hattia spurned the Tau's offer of allegiance, stating emphatically that her loyalty to the Emperor was second to nothing, and that she was a woman without a price. She decried the duplicity of aliens and vowed that all would be wiped from the face of Hyphus. Hattia saw the priest's survival and message as a sign from the Emperor himself. Her faith was restored, and she took to directing the campaign for Hyphus with renewed vigour. The Verothian Uprising. In the bowels of Verothian's hive cities, gene-stealer cultists of the Pauper Princes stirred. They faced not one challenge for their world, but two. Alien interlopers beguiled the human elite, hoping to seize the planet. This could not be allowed. Verothian belonged to the Star Children. The Pauper Princes were not ready to rise, but they had no choice. These were dangerous, confusing times. The powers of the Dark Gods were palpable. In opposition to them were Verothian's ruling elite, the oppressors, whose deluded holy men preached louder and punished harder. Then, the arrival of the Tau changed everything. Their presence threatened to shift the balance of power and destroy the oppressor hierarchies that generations of Pauper Princes had worked so devotedly to infiltrate. The Tau had to be stopped, and to do that, Verothian had to be seized. All true believers knew that the Star Children would reward the Pauper Princes for their efforts, and that any hardship was worth that prize. The tendrils of the Pauper Princes' gene sects reached throughout Verothian, from hive sumps to spire tops. Yet theirs was not the only influence undermining loyalty to the Imperial oppressors. A new cult had emerged, and was rapidly spreading, dedicated to what it called the greater good. They too spoke of unity, of deliverance that would come from the stars. This cult had also recruited members in echelons of power. To many of the Pauper Princes' primacies, they represented a considerable threat. Verothian's internal politics became embroiled in tense struggles as agents for both the greater good and the Star Children vied for supremacy in debates about whether or not Verothian should welcome the Tau. Using their already tight clawhold, the Pauper Princes won the fraught diplomatic battle. Miraculously, the Star Children had blessed them with more maguses than ever before, as if they knew that their worshippers would need such help. These individuals had inveigled themselves into the upper strata of Verothian's elite, infiltrating councils and official meetings. Now they used their psychic powers and domineering oratory to persuade their colleagues that an alliance with the Tau Empire was not in their planet's best interests. In the aftermath of the Great Rift's emergence, the Magus' powers had become even stronger, and they exploited these boons from the Star Children to the full. They took over the minds of many officials, casting vital votes or making rousing speeches. Where necessary, the Maguses sent the Sanctuses to those who could not be convinced. Meanwhile, from the toxic sumps to the filthy sewers, from hot manufactorum to claustrophobic habblocks, the Pauper Princes prepared for war. Biophages implanted more and more of the populace with gene-stealer germ seed, knowing that aberrants would be needed in their thousands in the wars to come. Tales of great masked heroes and liberators with legendary marksmanship spread throughout the underhives, stirring the oppressed masses against their overlords. Sanctuses did their bloody assassination work day after day. Priests of the Imperial Creed were discovered by their acolytes, with their throats slashed. Astra Militarum officers dropped dead mid-briefing after being struck by silent and toxic needle rounds. And many shift leaders and bureaucrats simply vanished. Everywhere the Pauper Prince's agents worked, they saw traces of the interlopers, from cheaply printed tracts on an empire of unity to hyper-technological devices hidden in jewellery. As the Pauper Princes learn more of this so-called greater good, they cannot fail to notice the similarities it bore with their own creed. The differences revealed its falseness, however, and the Pauper Princes showed many of those misled by its teachings the true way, by convincing their rivals that the multi-limbed Tauvar they followed, in fact, represented the Star Children. The Pauper Princes lured many to their own cause. Clamovuses read scripture and promised brotherhood, telling tales of prophecy fulfilled and legendary uprisings. Some, not persuaded by the Clamovuses' impassioned preaching, were instead brought into the fold by the clarity of the Gene-Stealer's kiss. The Tau themselves were nowhere to be seen, unaware of how some humans had interpreted the Tauvar, and unwilling to endorse those interpretations they did know of. When the Tau's offer of friendship was rejected, the aliens began military action, coordinating extensively with followers of the greater good on Verothian. They struck primarily at the planet's principal hive, Zamorus. Many of the lead attacking cadres expected to be welcomed by their allies on the ground, enabling a rapid insertion. They were wrong. Defensive gun battery crews, though loyal, had in fact turned to the Star Children. Their deadly salvos shot numerous Tau gunships and transports out of the sky, sending burning wreckage crashing into Verothian's densely clustered hab blocks. Many Tau that successfully deployed were ambushed as they disembarked from their transports. Fire warriors and crisis suits, cut apart as waves of hybrids and aberrants, descended upon them in a predatory frenzy. Not all of the Tau were so easily overcome, however. Those who were part of the fourth sphere expansion had little care for any expected human welcome, and made assault landings regardless. Conducting detailed drills, these Tau cadres cut down hundreds of rushing cultists with precision pulse fire to secure a beachhead. Fifth Sphere cadres with particularly aggressive commanders also made successful landfall, though all were immensely hard-pressed. The veil of secrecy that the Pauper Princes had fought hard to maintain until this point was lifted. They now made themselves known to the Tau and oppressor alike. And their full uprising was impossible to hold back. All over Zamorus, the true colours of dozens of Verothian defence regiments were revealed. Thousands of troops carved a bloody path through barracks and fortifications, cleansing them of any personnel untouched by the Star Children's beneficence. A brutal hand-to-hand combat broke out between belligerents. Soldiers who only hours before had been allies, stabbing bayonets into each other's guts or throttling their former comrades on the blood-wet iron floors. The murderous underhive, always a place of wanton violence, became a scene of total war. Icons raised high, cultists surged through hive slums and manufactura, under the guidance of their primacies and nexuses, the tactical genius of their leadership far in excess of that of the gangers and enforcers standing against them. On every level of Hive Zamorus, conflict raged. Verothian Fusiliers clashed with brothers of the blooded Helix and the disciples of the Coil in the galleries of Pycon. The vast exhibitions of priceless art and artifacts playing host to acts of terrible bloodshed, as claw-limbed beasts wielded powerful mining tools as weapons. Such was the ubiquity of the cultists that the Fusiliers were forced to use flamers to burn them out, putting to the torch relics of thousands of years. The air was choked with the fumes of burning promethium and cultist corpses, but the brothers and disciples were tenacious. Again and again they attacked, slaughtering thousands until the hollowed-out shells of the galleries were finally seized in the name of the Star Children. The great garden of Syphax, a huge, verdant landscape, somehow preserved on the polluted world by unknowable ancient technology, was turned into a hellish quagmire as Goliath rock grinders and other vehicles of the ironworm earth-eaters clashed with the Sphyxian-honoured armoured regiments. Sentinels were shredded by the Goliath's drill dozer blades and before being crushed beneath the mining vehicle's heavy tires. But the Genestealer cults were not without significant losses of their own. Countless hybrids were eradicated as their vehicles were turned to mulch by the metallic cannons of the fast-moving devil dogs. The battlefield itself was an enemy to both sides, the fighting having shattered macro pipes, siphoning industrial runoff away from the Great Garden. Hundreds of vehicles fell victim to the thick mud churned up as a result, their crews drowning as they were sucked into its stinking depths. Tau forces continued to strike amongst the chaotic warfare that had consumed Zemerus's every level. Though they had failed to gain a true foothold, they were a thorn in the Pauper Prince's side. Their forces were adaptable, motivated, and fast-moving, and their weapons were powerful. Streams of repeating pulse weapon fire consumed swathes of neophyte hybrids, while lethal fusion technology simply erased aberrants from existence. In this fight, the Tau were prepared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial garrison, though few expected the alliance to survive the defeat of the Pauper Princes. All of these battles were secondary, however. One target above all stood out to the Pauper Princes' patriarchs. They had to seize Zemerus's primary genitorium. Whilst this remained in the oppressor's hands, power could be denied to many of the Hive's regions, including those fully in the Pauper Prince's claws. The primacies could not countenance such a vulnerability which, if exploited, could result in the murder of millions of their kin and the failure of their uprising. Hundreds of thousands of cultists attacked, led by a patriarch and a number of maguses. The generatorium was a huge complex of raging furnaces, thrumming reactors, and rapidly spinning turbines. The oppressors were fully aware of its vital importance, and the regiments defending it were amongst the finest on the planet. Its workers, who lived in densely packed hab blocks on the generatorium site itself, were themselves hardened people from whom the oppressors recruited a tough and uncompromising militia. The Pauper Prince's first steps were to isolate the generatorium. Distraction attacks were launched all over Zemerus to further divide the enemy. These diversionary actions meant that when the attack came, it was all but impossible for Imperial relief forces to make it through. The Pauper Princes assaulted from every direction, Clamovuses spurring on the cultists to attack with unbridled ferocity. Squadrons of captured Leman Russ battle tanks assailed gates and walls head-on, battle cannons roaring. Such actions distracted the defenders, while pure-strain Genestealers scuttled out from sewer drains and disused service tunnels to cut down the foe in droves, using their immense dexterity to scale defences and buildings. No human was out of their predatory reach. It was of paramount importance to the primacies that the generatorium was captured in as attack-to form as possible. Not only would this safeguard their own holdings, but it would enable them to control power levels in those areas of the Hive that remained under Imperial control. Nexuses, formidable tacticians and fiercely intelligent, feared that the Imperials might utilize the generatorium's self-destruct function to deny the Pauper Princes their prize. Ahead of the uprising, some of the generatorium's human workers had been inducted into the cult and had managed to infiltrate the site's hierarchy. At the desired moment, these hidden agents struck down their former colleagues with concealed blades, or opened crucial passageways to allow Sanctuses and the Kelomorph into secure locations. Wherever the Maguses walked, Imperial troops attacked each other, their minds seized and forced to carry out terrible acts of treachery. Many others were left dumbfounded, sent into trance-like states that left them as easy prey for cultist troops, who ripped them apart with wicked claws and talons or gunned them down in cold blood. With their newfound power, the Maguses imbued their followers with incredible strength. Cultists overpowered defenders at every turn, with even neophytes capable of wrenching arms from sockets and punching straight through flak armour. Zemerus's generatorium fell. Every one of the Pauper Prince's many arms had played a key role in its downfall. Nice. Demonstrating perfectly the power of the Star Children and the blessings they bestowed upon their offspring. With this victory achieved, the Pauper Princes rapidly increased the ferociousness of their war to seize Zemerus, and the last defenders fell scant months later. Whilst this in itself was a remarkable feat, many hives still stood across Verothian, some in the hands of the Tau Empire, others still in Imperial control, after throwing down the uprising they faced. A number of these fell in a matter of days, such was the Pauper Prince's prevalence. Others fought on, selling their lives dearly. Gene-stealer cult agents of all kinds had been galvanized by the challenge ahead, carrying out their God-given tasks with deep fervour. Nonetheless, the Pauper Princes had much work left to do to bring about the arrival of the Star Children. And there we have it, a little update on what the Tau have been up to. There's some nice hints and stuff. If you're not aware, there's a novel, I forgot what it's called, War of Secrets, that's it, by Phil Kelly, who's the guy who does most of the Tau lore and the novels, Farsight, so on. Definitely recommend checking out War of Secrets. It goes, it's insane. It explains the Tau God. We get some little hints and things in here. But yeah, that goes well into it and really, yeah. I think I did a review on it years ago. I don't know. Check that out if you want. It's on the channel somewhere, War of Secrets. But definitely recommend getting the audiobook or the book if you can. It's been out of print for a long time, so ebook or audiobook. The audiobook was really good. I listened to the audiobook and it was really good. Or did I read it? I think I read it. Anyway, excellent stuff on the Tau. I really like the Tau. I don't know why people think that they're like the good guys. They've been messed up and dodgy since inception. It's just like people didn't see it. They just had Star Trek vision on their, the Imperium's bad. Well, yeah, it's 40K. You know what I mean? Like what do you want me to say? Yeah, the Tau are also bad. Like, think about it. Actually think about it. Anyway, I've done some other videos on the Tau that I'm quite proud of that I recommend you check out if you like this. I'll include the links below, but the main ones are the second Damocles Gulf Crusade, which leads directly to this. The recent video I did on the Tau Empire, which goes through the whole lore, and the Farsight video I did a couple of months ago. So I'll include links below in the description to that. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think of the mic again, because I made a slight adjustment because people were saying it was a bit too low. I don't actually know what I'm doing, so I've just had to fiddle with it. I don't know. I might change it back. I feel like, I don't know. I might change it back. I'm just ranting now. I'm going to go. More stuff coming soon. Bigger videos coming probably in May at this point. It's Easter when I'm recording this now. So it's Easter Day, 2025 for future reference. The 20th of April. So, probably be in May. And we will have finished the Psychic Awakening series that we've got here. And then we'll do some other stuff in May. And a lot of that will be big campaign videos and a couple of short stories. So maybe a bigger story. But I don't know. I don't want to overpromise. It's better to underpromise and overperform than the opposite. So, and I usually underperform. So, you know what I mean? I want to just like get on the right track as we go forward. Yeah. Thank you for supporting the channel. Your names are going by here. All the supporters of the channel. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who gives super chats. Thank you to everybody who gives the super likes and all that stuff. Is it super likes or is that something else? I forgot what that is. Thank you all ever so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, the algo's doing me over at the minute. But we'll crack on again, boys. Don't you worry. We'll be back. But if you could like the video, I really appreciate that, and comment. That all really helps. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell, and check your subscription feed in case you miss the videos. If they don't show up in your home screen, I've been told that this is the issue. YouTube's changed the algo, and it's like TikTok now. That's what I'm told. Anyway, I'll see you later. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good one. May the Emperor protect for the greater good.